Have you ever had the feeling that something or someone around you is too strange, that they don't even seem like a normal person? I'm not talking about monsters or fantastical creatures. I'm talking about that person who seems too cold. The colleague who repeats cliches like a robot. That family member who, even while smiling, has empty eyes, as if behind the mask there was no one there. And what if this wasn't just an impression? In the 19th century, a secret manuscript was buried because it revealed a disturbing secret. Not everyone who walks among us has a soul, not out of malice, not by destiny, but because their spiritual evolution stopped. They are empty shells, bodies without light. And the worst part? They are everywhere, and you have already felt it. Helena Blavatsky, the most hated and loved woman in occultism, called these beings machine men. The elite of the time burned her texts. The church called her a heretic, because this truth destroys humanity's greatest illusion, that we are all the same inside. But today, in a world of superficial relationships and crowds following trends like zombies, could that manuscript have been right? Stay here, because what comes next will challenge everything you believe about reality, and maybe about yourself. Born in 1831 in Imperial Russia, Blavatsky was not an ordinary woman, especially by the standards of her time. From an early age, she challenged everything: traditional education, the social roles imposed on women, and most importantly, the boundaries between the visible and invisible worlds. At 17, she left behind a comfortable life and began a journey that would take her to forgotten corners of the planet, Egypt, Tibet, India, in search of a knowledge she knew existed but was hidden from the eyes of common men. Blavatsky came into contact with occult masters known as the Mahatmas, beings who had already transcended the limits of ordinary life and guided seekers of truth. Under their guidance, Blavatsky gathered and systematized a series of ancient teachings, giving rise to a movement she called Theosophy, literally divine wisdom. In 1875 in New York, she founded the Theosophical Society, whose mission was bold and to many threatening: to promote the universal brotherhood of humanity without distinction of race, creed, sex, or color, to encourage the comparative study of religions, philosophies, and sciences, to investigate the latent powers in human beings and the mysteries of the universe. But she went beyond beautiful words. Her books, especially The Secret Doctrine, are monumental treatises that dive into ancient cosmogonies, hidden anatomies of the human being, and spiritual realities that most people don't even suspect exist. And it is precisely in this ocean of knowledge that the unsettling notion emerges that not all human beings are spiritually complete, that there are, among us, those who function as bodies animated only by physical and instinctive life, without a true individualized soul. Blavatsky challenged not only the emerging materialist science, but also religious dogmatism, proposing a view of the human being as a process in evolution, not as a fixed entity. And it was precisely this view that allowed for the possibility that some had not yet completed this process, thus living an incomplete existence. Blavatsky was persecuted, slandered, called a liar, but she never backed down. She died in 1891 in London, without riches, without worldly glories, but leaving behind a legacy that to this day arouses as much fascination as discomfort. To understand the depth of the shock that this manuscript represented, it is necessary to dive into the 19th century scene, a time of brutal contrasts. The world saw itself divided between the arrogance of modern science and the desperate resistance of spiritual traditions. It was the era of the Industrial Revolution. Electricity, trains, the telegraph. Everything seemed to announce the definitive victory of materialist reason over the mysticism of the past. Science was beginning to unveil the laws that governed matter, while religion, cornered, tried to maintain its power through fear and orthodoxy. The human spirit, confused and divided, was bombarded by two opposing messages. On one side, the promise of technical progress. on the other the weight of guilt and blind faith. In this environment of extremes, Helena Blavatsky dared to bring forth knowledge that neither of the two dominant forces wanted to face. Science mocked anything that smelled of spirituality. The Church didn't want competition in the realm of the soul. When Blavatsky published works such as Isis Unveiled, 1877, and The Secret Doctrine, 1888, she immediately attracted both attention and hatred. It wasn't just the mystical content that bothered people. It was the fact that she claimed an occult tradition much older than Christianity, deeper than any modern philosophy, capable of explaining the origin of life, the soul, and the universe with a complexity that made both priests and scientists uncomfortable. Some manuscripts circulating within the Theosophical Society were considered for initiates, never intended for the general public. It was known that revealing these ideas without proper preparation could cause panic, fanaticism, or worse, manipulation, with groups using the concept of soulless beings to justify prejudices and atrocities. Moreover, the very term soulless men hurt a concept that the new Western society was beginning to idolize: absolute equality. It was unacceptable in a world that intended to evolve toward a planetary democracy to admit that among men there was an essential spiritual difference. Thus, over time, the manuscript was forgotten. Now, more than a century later, while humanity drowns in materialism, existential emptiness, and spiritual alienation, these ancient truths are quietly beginning to resurface. When Blavatsky speaks of soulless men, she is not referring to monsters, deformed creatures, or demons in the popular sense. She speaks of ordinary people, people you encounter every day, at the market, at school, in politics, on television. People who outwardly are indistinguishable from anyone else, but who inwardly are empty cocoons. Empty cocoons. This is the expression Blavatsky uses with surgical precision. A human body that functions perfectly, breathes, speaks, works, even loves at a certain level, but that does not carry the conscious spiritual spark. What animates these bodies is not an immortal, individualized soul, but only a basic life principle, what in Theosophy is called prana, the vital energy that also animates plants and animals. According to Blavatsky, the true soul, the higher immortal self, is not born along with the physical body. It is something that develops slowly over multiple existences. It is the result of a complex process called spiritual individualization, and not everyone, she says, has reached that point. Some current human beings are, in fact, remnants of earlier stages of spiritual evolution. They function almost by repetition, following routines, obeying social impulses, imitating behaviors, but they do not possess a deep individual consciousness. They do not question, they do not truly connect with the greater meaning of life. They do not aspire to anything beyond physical survival and immediate pleasure. These soulless men are not evil in the traditional sense. They are not necessarily criminals or monstrous. In many cases, they are correct, polite, even pleasant. The difference is more subtle, but absolutely fundamental. They do not have a spiritual center of their own. Blavatsky describes this almost surgically. They are like animated mannequins. Their feelings are conditioned reflexes. Their opinions are repetitions of their environment. Their inner life is shallow, shaped only by external circumstances. Nothing original or transcendental is born from them. And here lies the most disturbing aspect. They do not know they are like this. To them, their limited existence is normal. They do not miss something more because they have never experienced the fullness of the conscious soul. For those who have eyes to see, this difference is devastating, and at the same time difficult to express. It is that strange feeling of emptiness you sense when talking to certain people. That impression that no matter how friendly they seem, something is missing, something essential that simply is not there. Blavatsky's view is not one of condemnation, but of diagnosis. For her, spiritual evolution is a long process, and not everyone is at the same stage. The empty cocoons are, in a certain sense, dormant seeds. Some will never germinate. Others might one day awaken to higher consciousness, but until then they continue living, acting, multiplying, without realizing they lack what makes a being truly human: the living soul, conscious of itself, connected to the divine. This concept, if taken seriously, changes everything. It redefines the way we look at the world. It brutally honestly explains why we sometimes feel such deep loneliness even when surrounded by crowds, and why, among so many, there are so few who truly shine with their own light. If we really want to understand where the so-called soulless men come from, we need to understand one of the most powerful, and least known, keys to Blavatsky's thought: the concept of the root races. Forget everything you learned about evolution in traditional history books. For Blavatsky, and for the ancient esoteric traditions she revived, humanity is not simply the product of linear biological evolution. Human beings did not arise merely through random physical adaptations to the environment. True evolution is spiritual and happens in great cycles, unfolding over eras that span millions of years. These cycles are called root races. Each root race represents a stage of development of human consciousness. Not all root races had physical bodies like ours. In the early ages of humanity, the bodies were not dense, solid, and material like they are now. They were almost like clouds of condensed energy or light, difficult to imagine with our current minds, so accustomed to the material world. These primordial beings existed in dimensions of lighter matter, where consciousness had more freedom and fewer physical limitations. It was only over immense periods of time that these bodies became increasingly denser, more physical, until they reached the solid form we know today. Blavatsky describes that we are currently living in the fifth root race, called the Aryan, the dominant civilization today. But before us came others, the first root race, purely ethereal, more energy than matter. The second, semi-material, but still very different from today's dense bodies. The third, known as the Lemurian, already had physical bodies. It was at this point that spirit began to more firmly infiltrate matter. The fourth root race, the Atlanteans, developed immense material and mental power, but fell into corruption and were destroyed. Now, we, the fifth, carry, in our genes and in our spirits, inheritances from all those previous eras. According to Blavatsky, not everyone kept pace with spiritual evolution. Some individuals or groups may be, in a way, lingering remnants of earlier stages, cocoons of humanity that have not yet completed the leap of consciousness that others have made. These evolutionary delays explain why, within the same apparent humanity, we find such abysmal spiritual differences. It is not just about culture, education, or genetics. It is about levels of internal development that vary immensely. Within this perspective, the soulless men would be those who have not yet completed the process of individualization begun in previous races. They have modern bodies, live in modern cities, use modern technology, but internally still vibrate at very ancient, very basic frequencies. Think of a great river splitting into several branches. Some branches flow strongly toward the sea, others get stuck in swamps and eventually evaporate. Human spiritual evolution is much the same. Not all reach the destination. And the most disturbing part, according to Blavatsky, the time to complete this journey is not infinite. Each cycle offers limited opportunities. Those who do not develop their soul over the ages may eventually be discarded as sterile forms, incapable of moving forward. It is not a punishment. It is simply the law of life in action. That which does not evolve dies, in the physical plane, and also in the spiritual plane. This is the foundation of the idea of the root races, a grand and brutally honest vision of humanity as a spiritual battlefield where few awaken to the call of the soul, and many remain trapped in the gears of matter. When it comes to the soul, many people imagine it as an automatic right, something that simply comes with the package of being born human. Since childhood, we are taught that everyone has a soul, as a guaranteed inheritance given by God at the moment of the first breath of life. But the soul is not a gift we simply receive. The soul is a privilege, and more than that, it is an achievement. According to the Theosophical view, being human in the biological sense is not the same as being human in the spiritual sense. Being born with a human body only gives us the opportunity to develop a conscious soul, but that opportunity must be seized, must be worked on, like a seed that must be patiently cultivated to bloom. Otherwise, it may simply never germinate. For Blavatsky, the true individualized soul, the one that is eternal, self-conscious, and capable of direct connection with the divine, is only born through a process involving numerous incarnations. Each life brings lessons, trials, moments of choice. In each one, the human being is tested. Will they follow only their instinctive impulses, trapped in the material world, or will they seek something beyond, something that transcends the immediate? The formation of the soul does not happen in a moment of sudden ecstasy or by a simple act of faith. It is forged, life after life, through choices, through renunciations, through pain and love, through the thirst for deeper meaning. Those who ignore this quest, who live only for fleeting pleasures or blind survival, may pass through existence after existence without ever awakening to true spiritual consciousness. For them, the body lives, the mind thinks, but the soul, that living spark, remains dormant or never fully forms. In an increasingly materialistic society, where values are shaped by consumption, by image, by immediacy, how many are truly cultivating the soul? How many still see life as a training ground for something much greater than external success? How many remember that to exist is more than to breathe? It is to awaken, to illuminate oneself, to live with purpose. The soul is rare and precious. And perhaps this rarity explains why, sometimes, we feel an instant and deep connection with a few people throughout life, as if silently recognizing those who have also earned the right to be called true human beings. If accepting that the soul is a spiritual achievement, and not an automatic attribute, is already a shock, facing the idea that there are human beings living without a soul is even more challenging. Who are these people? Physical appearance reveals nothing. Culture, intelligence, social skills, none of these reveal it either. A person may be brilliant at their job, kind to their friends, seductive in their speech, and yet, inwardly, be empty of higher consciousness. What these individuals lack is not intelligence or superficial emotional capacity. It is depth. It is that inner light that exists only in those who have begun to awaken to higher dimensions of being. These empty shells live guided by instincts, by environmental trends, by social conventions. Their emotions are reactive, conditioned. Their choices are automatic, based on immediate pleasure or survival. Even when they seem altruistic or just, they often do so merely out of social convenience, imitation, or the desire for acceptance, not from a true connection to something greater. They themselves do not perceive their condition. For them, their life is complete. They do not miss something transcendent, because they have never experienced what it would be like to live in conscious contact with the soul. They are satisfied with worldly pleasures, with the incessant pursuit of security, status, or sensory gratification, and thus they continue cycling, incarnation after incarnation, trapped in a purely biological existence. The absence of a full soul does not necessarily mean perversity. Many are merely indifferent, superficial, incapable of true compassion or of glimpsing spiritual realities. Others in certain cases may indeed, due to the lack of higher consciousness, be easily manipulated into destructive actions. In a world obsessed with appearance, external success and performance, it becomes increasingly difficult to perceive this difference. But in moments of true silence, when the social mask falls, you feel it. It's that conversation that leads nowhere, that presence that does not warm, that gaze that despite all movement and gesticulation is empty without sparkle. The body is there, the mind is active, but something essential is missing. If the soul is an achievement, and if not everyone has fully developed it, the natural question arises, is there a chance to change this? Or are we simply doomed to be what we are forever? The answer, according to Blavatsky and the Theosophical tradition, is clear, and once again profoundly uncomfortable. No one is doomed, but no one is spared from the consequences of themselves. And here, two fundamental concepts come into play for understanding the true dynamics of spiritual evolution: karma and reincarnation. If someone repeatedly lives only for the senses, only for the ego, without seeking anything beyond immediate pleasure or survival, that energy shapes their being. It generates a pattern of increasingly automatic existence, increasingly distant from the conscious light of the soul. In other words, the accumulation of unconscious karma traps the being in cycles of superficial life, without true growth, without transcendence. Reincarnation is the stage where karma unfolds. Each new life is a new opportunity, a chance to transform old patterns, to choose differently, to awaken to something beyond the mechanical cycle of being born, growing, consuming, and dying. But it is also a field of repetition if the individual does not awaken. Life after life, the potential soul, or the empty cocoon, keeps reproducing its tendencies, reinforcing its habits, closing itself more and more in the sleep of unconsciousness. Blavatsky is direct in stating, the soul is not an eternal guarantee for everyone. If it is not cultivated, if it is not awakened, it may simply never be born. And those who after many cycles do not develop their conscious spiritual individuality become like dry leaves in the wind of evolution, naturally discarded like fruits that did not ripen. For Theosophy, human life is sacred, not just because we are biologically special, but because each existence is a rare and precious opportunity to create something eternal within ourselves, something that no death and no time can destroy. The awareness of being a living part of the divine. At this point in the journey, it becomes clear that it is not enough to exist biologically, to be truly human in the spiritual sense. But to fully understand this, we need to look within ourselves with more attention and separate what many until now considered to be one and the same. Body, mind, and soul are not the same entity. They are three distinct realities that coexist within the human being, each with its functions, its laws, its destinies. The body is the easiest to understand. It is our physical, visible, tangible structure. It is an extraordinary instrument, a vehicle that connects us to the material world. Without it, we could not touch, see, hear, or experience the density of life on Earth. But the body, by itself, is just a sophisticated biological machine. It is born, grows, gets sick, and dies, obeying the laws of nature like any other living organism. There is no mystery here. The body is temporary. It is the cocoon where the spirit has the chance to manifest. But it is not in itself the expression of the eternal being. The mind, in turn, is more subtle. It organizes the information we receive from the world. The mind compares, judges, reasons, creates strategies to survive and thrive. It is what gives us the sense of identity in the physical world. I like this, I don't like that. But the mind is also moldable. It is conditioned by the environment, by culture, by experiences. The mind can be brilliant, creative, even genius, and still be totally disconnected from the soul. Because the mind, no matter how powerful it is, operates within the limits of time, space, and material logic. It thinks, but does not always feel the deep truth of being. And then, above body and mind, is the soul. The soul is the divine core, the higher self that exists beyond time, beyond matter, beyond logic. It does not just think, it knows. It does not just react, it feels in its essence. When the soul is awake, it brings a consciousness of unity, a living perception that we are more than this body and more than this restless mind. The soul is eternal. It witnesses the comings and goings of bodies and minds like someone watching the waves of an ocean. Always present, always silent, always calling us to a higher dimension of existence. But as we have seen, not everyone awakens this consciousness during a human life. Many live trapped within the body and the mind, believing they are only that. An organism that thinks and feels within imposed patterns. Without ever hearing the call of the soul, they live an entire life within the illusion of separation and survival. Awakening the soul is precisely about learning to recognize these inner layers, and even more, giving priority to what is eternal within us. It is when you begin to realize that you are not your body, you are not your thoughts, you are not your fleeting emotions. You are something that observes all of this. Before we continue, I want to invite you to take what could be your first real step towards strengthening your soul and accelerating your awakening. Throughout the video, we have spoken about the difference between merely existing and truly living with consciousness, and there is one practice that is like food for the soul: conscious gratitude. Gratitude is not just a beautiful feeling. It is a transformative force that expands your energy, breaks invisible barriers, and begins to activate deep parts of your being. If you feel that something inside you is moving, awakening, then the Quantum Thinking Challenge is for you. It is 21 days of gratitude practices so that you can begin, in a simple yet profound way, to build the foundation of an awakened soul. The link to participate is in the first pinned comment. Do not underestimate the power of 21 days that can change your entire vibration. And now, get ready. We are going to talk about the small, often shocking signs that distinguish those who truly have a developed soul from those who only seem alive. I imagine that after all this, you must be wondering, how do you recognize someone who truly has an awakened soul? How can you perceive in the midst of the crowd who has already begun to vibrate at a higher frequency and who is still walking as an empty cocoon? The answer is not in appearances. Those who have a developed soul carry marks that are invisible to common eyes but deeply perceptible to those who have learned to feel. The first sign, perhaps the most evident, is a deep, almost supernatural empathy. It is not about superficial empathy, like politeness or social kindness. I am talking about the ability to feel another's pain as if it were your own, to be moved by beauty, by injustice, by suffering, and also by the silent greatness of life. People with developed souls do not pass through the world indifferent. They are touched, wounded, inspired, because within them pulses a life that recognizes life in everything. Another clear sign is the constant search for greater meaning. While many live just to survive, to consume, to distract themselves, those who have an awakened soul carry a thirst that cannot be quenched by ordinary things. They seek the truth. They seek God. They seek to understand their purpose, even if it isolates them, even if it forces them to abandon the comforts and certainties of the crowd. The developed soul is restless. It does not conform. It feels that there is something more. And it does not rest until it begins to touch that reality with its own hands. You can also perceive a kind of inner luminosity. I am not talking about superficial charisma or manufactured charm. It is something else. It is a brightness in the eyes, a peace that endures even in storms, a silent strength that inspires trust and reverence, even without words. When you meet someone like that, you feel it immediately. Here there is something more. In contrast, the absence of the awakened soul reveals itself through coldness, superficiality, the inability to feel anything beyond one's own immediate interests. It is not hard to recognize. They are people who live on autopilot, who simulate emotions but do not live them deeply, who speak about love, justice, spirituality. But for them, these words are just empty sounds with no echo in the soul. Of course, no one is perfect. Even those who have already awakened their soul still carry shadows, doubts, moments of downfall. What makes the difference is that, for these living souls, each fall is an opportunity to grow. Each pain is a call to become more conscious. Each challenge is a chance to further polish the inner light. Recognizing these signs is not about judging others. It is about perceiving where we ourselves are. It is a mirror. Because deep down, every human being holds within themselves the possibility of awakening that magnificent soul. The difference is that some have already answered the call, and others are still asleep. And you? Can you perceive these signs within yourself? Do you feel this restlessness, this hunger for something that the ordinary world cannot satisfy? Now that you are familiar with the reality of soulless men, the evolution of the root races, and the arduous process of conquering the true soul, it is time to face the hardest question of all. What does all this mean for our world today? Look around. How many people do you see truly alive? How many are really seeking something beyond surviving, accumulating, competing? The existential emptiness that plagues the modern world is no accident. It is the inevitable symptom of a massive disconnection from the spiritual dimension. An epidemic where people, even surrounded by material comfort, feel an inner void that nothing can fill. Depression, anxiety, apathy, all of these are born from the absence of an active, conscious soul. If we do not understand the difference between living biologically and living spiritually, we will continue marching toward the abyss of alienation, fragmentation, and total loss of meaning. But there is another side to this reality. Each crisis, each emptiness, each pain we feel when perceiving this disconnection is also a call. Pain is the soul's alarm, trying to awaken those who can still be awakened. Do you feel your soul? When you look inside yourself, do you feel a living, burning presence seeking something beyond? Or just the noise of a restless mind and the desires of the body? And when you look at the people around you, do you feel the glow of other awakened souls? Or do you only see bodies moving, talking, working, but whose eyes carry no depth? This is the true division of humanity, not the division of races, countries, ideologies, but the invisible division between those who live mechanically and those who truly live with soul. And the great truth is that although few still hear this call, it only takes a single living soul to illuminate countless sleeping souls around it.